Welcome to Rooted and Rising Healing. I'm your host, Hallie Roderick, and this space is for women rebuilding after betrayal. Here we make sense of what happened, find truth again, and reconnect with who you really are beyond the pain. Whether you're staying, leaving, or still in the middle, your story matters. Together, we'll explore truth, clarity, and the quiet courage it takes to rise from the wreckage of what was into the wholeness of who you're becoming. You're safe to be here. In the messy middle, in the rebuilding, and in the rising. Let's begin. If you're a woman healing from betrayal trauma and craving space to breathe, regulate, and reconnect with yourself, I want to share a few upcoming healing experiences that you might want to explore. I help facilitate these intensives and retreats alongside some of my most trusted colleagues. They're small, trauma-informed settings designed really to support your nervous system and not overwhelm it. March 17th through the 20th is our Betrayal Trauma Intensive. May 5th through the 8th is a Somatic Healing Intensive. Both of those are held in Spanish Fork, Utah. And July 20th through the 27th, we're hosting the Rise, Renew, Restore Retreat in Costa Rica. And there's just a few spots still available. You can learn more about all of these upcoming events in the show notes. And remember that you don't have to rush your healing and you don't have to do it alone. I think one of the most difficult aspects of betrayal trauma is grief and the part that grief plays in this. One of the hardest parts of grief and grieving and betrayal is that you're grieving something that nobody else can see. When we're experiencing grief because of an outward visual loss, like a death or some other traumatic event in our lives that is visible to the outside world, oftentimes we get support from that. I don't know in your world, but in my culture, when we lose someone that we love, people in my circle show up with food and with a hug and with presence and with words of encouragement and comfort. But in betrayal, oftentimes this journey is not known to the outside world. And even if it is, it's not understood by the outside world. And so it can be such a lonely journey. And I think that loneliness adds to the grief of it. And betrayal doesn't just break trust. It breaks what we thought was the past, what we thought was our future, the story that we thought we were living, our sense of self. And so this grief is different. And it can be different depending on which path you end up taking ultimately. So think about if you're staying, or at least attempting to stay for now. You're grieving this while you're still married. You're grieving this while you're still loving. You're grieving while you're still trying and still staying. You're grieving who you thought he was, who you thought you were, what you thought the relationship was that you had, the future that you had imagined, the past that no longer makes sense to you. And none of this got a funeral. None of it got a funeral. None of it really got acknowledged by anybody from the outside world, and maybe not even from your spouse. There's often a loss of what feels like innocence. You can't really unknow what you now know. And this type of grief is at the nervous system level. The nervous system will never see the world in the same way again. And if we think about grief, if you decide to leave, while there's some similar aspects, it's now grieving all of the things that used to be your security, that used to be the hopes and dreams you had of a marriage that you thought you were living, and grieving what your new reality must look like and the challenges that come with that, and the fact that you didn't ask for any of this. And so grief is just messy and so painful. So back to the nervous system impact of grief. Even if you're choosing to stay and he's doing the work, there's this remembrance in your nervous system that at one point I wasn't safe here. At one point he wasn't safe for me. And so this is a challenge for us as the grief comes in waves. And just like when we are grieving someone that we love, grief with betrayal trauma is the same. It can sneak up on you. You can be doing really well one day, and then all of a sudden it feels like you're getting swallowed up by grief again. And so I just want to normalize that experience for anybody that is experiencing grief and these waves that come. So let's talk a little bit about some more of the losses around it. I think one of the biggest losses is that loss of your previous identity, of who you were before the betrayal, of losing that trust with yourself and the ability to trust others, and that loss of the woman who didn't have to scan for danger, whose brain and body wasn't on hypervigilance, on high alert. And so all of these losses of the future, of the past, of your safety, of who you were before, can be really frustrating if you start to wonder why I can't just move on. So I wanted to normalize that. And your body is grieving even if your mind doesn't want to. Grief is not a choice. This is a nervous system process. And it happens in waves of sadness or anger, sometimes longing. Sometimes I think we can experience it as numbness. And on the opposite side of that, hope, and then sadness again. And there's this picture that I've seen before, and it shows this image of a grief cycle. And on one side, it's this pretty little bell curve, and it's like the loss happens on one side, and then you cycle through each of the phases of grief seemingly once, and you exit out over on acceptance again, like you never have to go back through it. And then on the other side of this graphic, there's the same bell curve, but it's messy little scribble lines that go back and forth in between anger and acceptance and shock and hope and all of those different things. And that's more what I believe most of us experience in this grief journey in betrayal trauma. And so just as a reminder, not that there's anything wrong with you, that's the mourning process, the grieving process that happens. And it's actually in the APSATS model, the multidimensional partner trauma model. Mourning and grief is part of phase 2 work in it. So it is well known that this is part of this journey. So if you're experiencing that, there's nothing wrong with you. And we're going to talk about some ways that you can honor that grief and give yourself the attention that you need to not make it go away, but to help yourself move through it. So one thing I just want to speak to those of you that are staying. When you stay, there's no clear ending, okay? And so there's no social permission to grieve. There's no rituals. There's no closure because everybody thinks that you're okay if you didn't leave. But inside, you might still be carrying a sort of death that nobody can see. And if you choose to leave, I would imagine there's still waves of grief that happen. From the outside world, it might look like, oh, there's an ending point when they left the relationship. But you might still be experiencing grief years later that come up around the loss of your relationship. So neither one is more difficult than the other, but I just want to acknowledge that there might be some differences to it, but there's a shared experience of grief. And when grief isn't honored, it can really cause more emotional impact on us. So this is why it's important for me to talk about it with you today. If we don't honor it and we don't allow ourselves to process it, if we avoid it or we try to ignore it, it can turn into depression. It can turn into bitterness and resentment. It can turn into chronic anger or emotional shutdown. Loss of desire to live life or to find joy can cause us to feel disconnected. And this is not because you're broken, but it's maybe because the grief was never allowed to be present, never honored. And how do we do this? This isn't from confronting or from making decisions. It's not something that we want to get past. It's something that we want to get through, which means to me, we have to make space for it. We have to allow it to be there. We have to sit in it. And if you have safe people that can sit in it with you, even better. That's more helpful when your pain is witnessed. It starts with naming what was lost. And this is actually, I would say, one of the most difficult and painful exercises to do in betrayal trauma healing is really identifying your losses. Because when you start to get into the weeds of it, there's a lot. There's a lot. Most of the times, there's so many ways that you've been impacted and things that you've lost because of someone else's choices, because of this situation you didn't ask for. And so naming it, identifying the things that you are grieving that have been lost, and then letting the sadness and the pain exist, witnessing it, allowing someone else to witness it. This is where the power of a support group or a really supportive coach or therapist can be critical to your healing process. Oftentimes at our in-person events, whether they be intensives or retreats, we create an opportunity for your grief to be witnessed. And so that would be something to look into, getting yourself a tribe of women who can witness your pain with you. And then slowing down, not just pushing through it all the time, but slowing down and allowing your body and your mind, everything to rest and to slow down. There can be rituals that you do to grieve something. There can be journaling. Again, journaling. I can't stress enough how helpful writing things down and giving them an outlet, getting them out of your head can be in your healing journey. You've probably heard me say, but I'll share it again, that your journal can be your best unpaid therapist. So if you aren't writing, get yourself a cheap little tablet from Target and start writing. You don't have to save everything. Some of these things you may not want anybody to ever read again, and that's not the purpose of it. The purpose of it is to give it an outlet and to move out of your emotional brain into your logical brain. And that's what tends to happen when we write things out. We're giving it a place to be seen, and we're witnessing it, at least for ourselves. If you don't want anybody to see it, I have a paper shredder under my desk I like to use when I'm writing things I don't want anybody to see again, but something that I needed to get out. Or you can take it in your backyard and burn it, light it on fire, and in a ritualistic way, like a surrendering that pain to your higher power. Somatic release. I released an episode a couple of weeks ago with Amy Woolsey on breathwork. I think that's one of the most powerful and quickest ways to release some of this grief, which is why I'm so passionate about it. So when we can do all of these things to allow the grief to be witnessed, it helps us make sense of what was lost. And it makes sense that we loved those things that we lost, right? So I want you just to remember that you're not stuck and you're not weak if you're in grief. If you're still grieving, it's because the things that you lost mattered to you. You loved those things. You looked at them in a certain way, and then it turned out that's not the way it was. And that deserves to be honored. I hope that this will give you a few things to start looking at your experience with grief and honoring where you're at with the grief, and really finding some ways to either witness the grief for yourself, and more powerfully and more importantly, to allow other people to witness your grief with you. Stay tuned over the next episodes as we're going to dive even deeper into the different phases of grief, how to recognize when you're in them, and how to not get stuck there. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you next week. Thank you for being here with me inside Rooted and Rising Healing. Remember, healing isn't a destination, it's a returning to your truth, to your voice, to the woman you were always meant to be. You have the power to rise at your own pace, in your own way. And when it feels hard, just come back to your breath and remind yourself, still I rise. If this episode spoke to you, I'd love if you shared it with another sister on the journey. And until next time, stay rooted, stay rising. You've got this.